Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to episode 212 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mummy. Glad to have you with us. We are hoping that everything is going well for you on this, what is at least here in Florida, a very hot August. Really just sort of digging in our heels and waiting for first sets of bar results to come out in early September. So if you're waiting on your July results, I'm feeling your pain. If this is your first time with us on the podcast, we're glad to have you here. Welcome. We're glad that you found us. You can watch or listen to these podcasts, depending on your preference, and it's really easy to do either one. If you'd like to watch the podcast, you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/212, so that's the episode for this week, and watch the entire episode, and the show notes are right there on the page for you. If you prefer to listen to your podcast, you can do that by going to Apple iTunes or Spotify or iHeartRadio or any number of places where podcasts are available, and our podcast is distributed through a number of those. And you'll see the show notes there as well. And if you'd like to go back into our archives and check out all of our episodes, going back to episode number 1, you can do that by going to celebrationbarreview.com. You'll see a button at the top of the page for podcasts. Just click on that, and all of the past episodes and the show notes are right there for you. Well, speaking of going back in time, what we're going to do this week is to revisit a video I made, actually originally about 10 years ago. I did a series called Myths About the Bar Exam, and it's had a lot of views. I mean, like a lot of views over the years. And over the last couple of years, I've periodically updated some of those videos as I thought maybe some of the myths had changed or adapted. The truth is, not a whole lot has changed in 10 years, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But the myths that I was talking about 10 years ago are still the myths, many of them that we're dealing with today. And in today's episode, I've got a new updated version of myth number 6 that we titled Fool Me Once. But today, what we're going to focus on is this idea of, is it possible to fool the bar examiners? In other words, can you take what should be an unsuccessful result and turn it into a successful result by virtue of some unique way of studying or gimmick or method or approach to the exam or approach on the exam? And I'm going to debunk some of the myths that you might have heard about in that regard as well. So I invite you to stick around for that video. I think you're going to enjoy it, find it useful, and love to get your comments and thoughts about that. Before we jump into that particular message, however, I'm really excited to share with you something that we've been working on for a while and just now going to make available. If you're a longtime listener to this podcast, you know that I, virtually without exception, talk about the free webinar that we do on Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern, that's 4 o'clock Pacific time. And that webinar, called How to Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam, has been incredibly successful and incredibly popular. I mean, literally thousands of people have gone through it. It has been a game changer for so many folks, and it's a terrific webinar, and I've come to love doing it live, and we've had literally evergreen on-demand webinar versions out for years, and they are well attended every week. Well, we decided that we wanted to update that webinar a bit and add some new information, some new case studies, and to actually take some video and audio of some of our successful students talking about their results rather than me talking about them. We also wanted to streamline the webinar just a bit, get right to the meat of what we found students want to know about. And so we now have a new webinar with a new title. And our new webinar is called Do Something Different. Makes sense. If you want a different result, do something different. We're still going to look at how to make the next bar exam your last bar exam, but we're going to approach it, I think, in a way that'll really be interesting. I hope it'll be informative and helpful to all of you. And as always, the webinar is totally free, but you do need to register. And you can do that in one of a couple of different ways. If you're watching the video, scroll down to the bottom of this page, you'll see a link, and you can click on that to sign up for Thursday night at 7 p.m. If you're listening to the podcast, just check the show notes and you'll see the link there. or you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/webinar and register that way. Now, when you go to register, you'll note that there are two buttons. There's the live on-demand version, which I'll be doing a Q&A, which we've always done and has been extremely popular. And that's the Thursday night at 7 p.m. version. And then there's also an on-demand version. If Thursday at 7 Eastern doesn't work in your schedule, you can schedule to watch this same new webinar on demand anytime at your convenience. The only difference is, of course, I'm not doing live Q&A, but you can email your questions to me and I will personally respond and promptly do so. So I think it's a pretty good deal. And we've got the same great offers in both the on-demand and the live webinar. So I hope you'll join us this Thursday. It's August 23rd is our next version of Do Something Different, and I really hope you'll join me. We did this for the first time a week ago, and I loved it. It was great. So I hope that you'll enjoy it as much as I enjoyed doing it. So we'll see you Thursday the 23rd, 7 p.m. Do something different. Yeah, do something different if you want a different result. Well, one of the things you want to do differently is you don't want to buy into some of the old mythology around the bar exam. And I think that's a perfect segue into today's message from our 10 myths about the bar exam that we titled Fool Me Once. Let's jump into that message now. The top 10 myths about the bar exam. And in this video, we're looking at myth number 6. So we're about halfway through our list. I hope you've enjoyed the series so far. I've gotten a lot of great comments over many, many years since I first did this video set from people around the world. And it's a lot of fun to read their take on these different myths. But today is one of my favorites because it's an all-encompassing umbrella myth in which I want to talk about some specifics. But the title of this myth is Fool Me Once. And you know how that works out. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I would add fool the bar examiners, and you'll probably fail. You know, trying to fool the bar examiners is really what we want to focus on today. And the myth here is that somehow you can game or outfox or outwit the exam. You can beat the exam by doing something that would cause the examiners to give you a passing score that you might not otherwise deserve. Now, that's a nice myth. It's a nice fantasy to have, but it just doesn't operate in reality. In fact, on its face, it's really ludicrous. And I think most of us know in our more rational moments that would be the case. But you know, there's something about the bar exam that brings out the irrational in some people. And so over the years that I've been doing this, I have seen people try a number of techniques that they are hopeful, or in some cases even certain, will help them game the test or beat the test, but it just doesn't work in reality. So I wanted to call your attention today to at least a few of those and make you aware of them and hopefully dissuade you from trying them. I want to start with a couple that are fairly widespread. They're relatively pernicious in my view, and they're really more the result of some of my colleagues in the bar review industry and their marketing attempts rather than any kind of real valid teaching or guidance. One of the ones that probably drives me the most crazy is the one that says you can learn how to pass the bar with just a few days of study, 3 days intensive or 6 days intensive or something of that nature. In fact, the people that say you can actually pass the bar if you just study for 6 or 7 weeks are really trading on that same mindset. And I'm tempted to say, oh, come on, just look at the numbers, look at the statistics. You know that that doesn't work. If you're thinking about it, you know that you can't possibly learn everything that you're supposed to learn from 3 years of law school or 4 years of law school in just a few days or even in just a few weeks. I don't care how brilliant the lecturers are. I don't care how well-formed their materials are. I don't care how many questions a night they tell you to do. That just doesn't work. But it's great marketing because, truthfully, who wants to spend months studying when somebody says, hey, you can do it in just a few days or a week or just a couple of weeks? You know, it reminds me a little bit of my time when I was younger in New York City, and there were the guys on the street that would say, hey, you want to buy a watch? It looks just like a Rolex. It works just like a Rolex, but you know what? It's not a Rolex. If you're going to take a 3-day or a 6-day course, that certainly isn't going to do you any good. And I think today people begin to understand that. But a lot of folks think, well, if I study for just 6 or 7 weeks, that'll be enough. The reality is, for most people, it's nowhere near enough. And in part, as we've talked about elsewhere, because the focus of that kind of a course is on memorizing and reciting rules and cramming, it has a very low effectiveness rate, and yet people continue to do it. Why? Because it feels like it should work. It feels like it would be a good way to beat the test. Hey, I just need a few weeks to study. Just not the case. I think people that do that end up spending money and time that they shouldn't be spending in the way that they're doing it. You're going to be doing work that you probably don't need to do by memorizing and reciting, trying to cram. And at the end of the day, it turns out to be a waste of time. It isn't going to allow you to pass the exam. In fact, empirically, most people that study that way don't pass. But what does it do? Well, it makes you crazy for that period of time, 3 days, 6 days, a few weeks, whatever it might be. And at the end of your studies, when you really should be reviewing and trying to narrow down and tighten up on the things that you need to do, what are you out there doing? Trying to add more stuff, trying to cram, trying to get more into your brain. Just not very effective. And so that's one of the crazy myths that I think is out there. Now, along the same lines, there are obviously lots of companies, I say lots, there are a few bar review companies today that say, we have a great algorithm, a computer program, and it will adapt to your way of study. I've been behind the curtain on some of these, and the fact is, there is no such thing. There is no algorithm in reality. The people that make those claims about having some more intelligent way to anticipate one answer going to another answer really haven't built the models. They haven't done the kind of testing that would make that possible. How do we know that? Well, the writers of the multi-state bar exam, the National Conference of Bar Examiners, they have been doing this for almost 50 years right now. That's 50. They have literally millions of points of test data available to them, data points, and they can't build a reliable computer model. They don't have an algorithm that says if you miss question 1, go to question 7. Doesn't exist. There is no way to do it. And so the reality is, how's somebody in their basement going to do that and then put it out on the web and sell it to you as an app for $49 or $99? I mean, in reality, that's the case. But because bar takers are often desperate, they go for anything that looks like a quick fix, and this is one of them. But don't get sucked into that. There's really no advantage to that. Good, solid studying for the multi-state, for example, comes from using licensed questions and then writing good answer explanations for each answer choice. Not by saying, if you miss torts question number 1, we're going to send you over to torts question. Well, here's the secret. It's really question number 2. And you may think you're getting something that's adapting to you, but in fact, it's not. It's just a myth, and it's a way to sell a product. Does it make any qualitative difference whatsoever in your study? None that we've seen, and none that's been empirically proven. I think it's more a way to beat you out of your money than it is to beat the exam. So I think that if you believe that there is some technological, computational advance that's going to cause you to perform better than you should on the exam, you're probably missing the boat. If the people that wrote the test haven't been able to come up with the technology to be able to do what others are claiming they can do to prepare you, I'm pretty sure that no one has a technology that will yet beat the test consistently and effectively. The third kind of way that I see people trying to beat the exam these days has to do with the way they draft their essays or performance tests. And this is really amazing stuff to me. I'm constantly faced with people that write their essays and then, depending on whether they're typing or handwriting, they underline certain words, or they put them in bold, or they put them in a larger font space. They underline all the terms of art. If they're handwriting, they block and print in big letters. They underline the key issues or phrases, whatever they think those might be. And when I ask students about this in writing conferences, they'll say, well, I learned in law school or from the big box bar review that if I underlined all the important words here, that the examiners won't bother reading my work. They'll just read the things I underlined, and then I'll pass. Well, I think you know by now that just isn't true. The examiners don't spend a long time reading your work, and they want to see well-written work, material that's organized and thoughtful and takes them step by step. But they are not just looking for buzzwords or terms of art or phrases. I've looked at examiner point sheets, the grading sheets that are used, and they never say to do what this myth would suggest. They never tell the grader to just look for buzzwords or terms of art. And I think, unfortunately, when a grader reads that kind of an essay or performance test, they often find it to be offensive because it's very obvious that the writer is trying to trick you. They're trying to game you somehow. And it's a very poor way to approach the test and to do your work. This is also the part of the same approach that people who are typing use when they say, well, I've got a 1-hour essay. I'm going to try and write 2,500 to 3,500 words. What are they doing? They're just trying to overwhelm you with so many words that you say, well, it must be a passing answer. Again, the examiners are not very amenable to that. In fact, in some jurisdictions like Georgia, they put a word limit on the answers precisely because they don't want you to do that. Now, way back when dinosaurs ruled the earth, when I was in law school, I had a classmate of mine who was brilliant, but hated civil procedure, just hated the class, hated the professor, and decided not to go to class. And we talked to him and we'd say, hey, Jeff, how are you planning to get through this class and pass the exam? And he said, oh, I've got a plan. I've got a great plan. So it turned out that his great plan was that when he got to the exam, he wrote his essay answer, and essentially he wrote illegible scribble, but then he printed the word Erie Doctrine. He claims 25 to 30 times on the essay, and he passed. He got a C-. It was the only thing that he actually wrote that was legible. Now, I think that's a pretty high-risk approach to take to passing an essay, and it's one thing in law school, but it's definitely something completely different on the bar exam, and not something I would ever suggest that anyone do. The point I want to make is that you don't get by just fooling the examiners into thinking you know something. You really have to demonstrate your knowledge. And so if your approach is to just take certain terms of art or buzzwords or issues and underline, highlight them, and put them as many places as you can in your answer, you're not likely to be successful. In my experience, this really demeans the process. It's condescending to the reader knows it, and in general, it doesn't seem to work in any jurisdiction. So it's another thing that you want to try and avoid if at all possible. Still another part of this attempt to game the system or to fool the examiners comes from those people who believe that they're going to be able to predict the exam questions or see the questions in advance. Now, that's a pretty good marketing technique. Back in the early days of our bar review, I used to make some predictions because the bar exam was relatively predictable. Today, I don't make predictions. I preview the exams, but I don't try to predict what I think is going to be on the test because there's really no way to know that. And someone that tells you that they know what's going to be on the test, or even worse, that they have the questions, and I've seen people in the industry who make that claim, is simply untrue. No one's got the questions. The questions are not actually written until about 6 months to a year before the bar exam, and then they're put under lock and key, and then they're distributed on exam day. No one's got the actual questions. There was a bar review provider a few years ago who actually went and took the multi-state bar exam many, many times. This is now prohibited under the terms of our licenses. But what this gentleman did was he went up to Alaska. I'm not sure why Alaska. Maybe because he knew that he could wear big pants when he walked into the test room. And he tried to walk out of the multi-state bar exam with the MBE stuffed down the front of his pants. Are you kidding me? He was stopped, he was arrested, he was sued for a violation of copyright and trademark infringement, and he ended up selling his company to one of the big box bar reviews. So I guess in the end it worked out okay for him. But the point is, no one's got the questions. And when people tell you, oh, I know exactly what's going to be on the MBE, no, they don't. That's not true. The best that you can hope to do is to have the style, the format, the feel of the questions, to understand the basic underlying truth of the question, the principle of the question. And that would be true for the MBE, but also true for essays and performance tests. Now, for those of us that are licensees of the National Conference of Bar Examiners, we can't do that. We can't go take bar exams and then steal the questions and put them out. That's part of the agreement that we make, and you would think that would be common sense. But we can tell you the style of question, the feel of the question. But what we're not doing, what we're not trying to do, is to tell you exactly what the questions are. And I don't know anyone that's ethical that would try to do such a thing. It's really dishonest, cheating, and if you're buying into that, you're the fool here, and you've been played. So if you think you're going to see questions, actual questions from the bar exam in your bar review, I'm here to tell you that is not going to happen. And if it did happen, you would be in serious ethical difficulty. And by the way, if your friends tell you, oh yeah, I got all the questions before the test, Well, I just want you to know that's an urban legend. It does not happen. Don't be distracted by that. Don't let people try and tell you that. It's just not true. And don't waste your time on it. You're not going to beat the test by having the actual questions in advance. Another myth that comes up sometimes, particularly in the multi-state, but really any multiple choice question, is that the idea is that somehow there's a pattern to the correct answers, and you can discern that pattern and then put it on your Scantron bubble sheet, and it will cause you to be successful. And this theory is based on the idea that you're not going to get through all your questions in the period of time, and therefore you have to have a pattern for the ones you don't get to. You've probably heard of this. Some people call it a Christmas tree pattern. There's some others that are suggested and are out there. But the Christmas tree is probably the most popular. Well, that's a myth as well. It doesn't make any appreciable difference in scoring. The bar examiners have actually written fairly lengthy monographs about this, and they've made very clear that they deliberately change the patterns up so that there are no appreciable patterns at all. It's totally a random circulation of grades and scores and letter choices that will be correct. The better response? Get through all the questions in the 3 hours on the MBE, and we'll show you in a course like ours how to do that. But those that tell you can Christmas tree or you could answer all the remaining questions with a particular answer, there are those that say, well, between A, B, C, and D, we've determined which number is most often correct. That's ridiculous, and you should know that and be aware of it. So again, these are things we know rationally, but irrationally in the pressure of the exam, sometimes people forget that. And then one of the last but most common ways that I find people trying to game the exam these days has to do with this idea of picking or taking the February test or the July test as though one of these tests were easier than the other. Now, I recognize that the pass rates in February are always much, much worse, and in the last few years, dramatically worse than July. But this isn't because the February test is harder. It's because the range of people, the mix of people taking the exam is so different between February and July. You have far more bar repeaters in February and far more first-time takers in July, and that's what causes the difference. My challenge has always been this. If I put 10 essays from a jurisdiction in front of you, and 5 came from February tests and 5 came from July tests, and I asked you to tell me which belongs with which group, you couldn't do it. Or if I took 5 MBE tests and put them in front of you, and I said 5 are from February and 5 are from July, tell me which comes with which group. Of course, you couldn't do that either. The exams are actually not easier or harder on one date versus another. It's literally, as I say, a matter of who's taking the exam, not the test itself. So you should not make your decision about sitting for an exam based on one date or the other. Now, a related topic to this, which I do think is a way in which you can at least be intelligent about what you do, is to choose the forum that you want to take the exam. And what I mean by this is that there is a wide range of passing scores across the country. And so if you have the option of taking the bar exam in a different state, it's something I think you should consider. One of the best ways to do that today is to look at the uniform bar exam. Again, as I'm recording, we're at about 33 jurisdictions, including a number of major jurisdictions like New York and Illinois, DC, New Jersey, that offer the uniform bar exam. It's one test, it's portable, and the scores are more manageable. You may not hit the passing score, the 266 in New York that's required, but there is a UBE jurisdiction that allows a 260 to pass. And given that, maybe you got a 265, you didn't get into New York, but your 265 is good enough to get you into 6 or 7 other jurisdictions. So I think you can be smart about where you sit for the test. And unless you have a burning desire to sit in Florida or Texas or California or Georgia, states that we prepare students for that are not reciprocity states, then I think it's a great idea to look at the UBE. And I think that's not so much trying to fool the system as to just make good sense of the information that's out there and to take a test that's better suited to your skills. To me, that's a better way to think about this process of strategizing for the exam than some of the other things we've talked about. So I guess my point is that there's no way to beat the test by trying gimmicks, using computer models or sophisticated systems or spotting buzzwords or being an issue spotter. That isn't going to work. What does work? Well, the truth is you study. You learn the principles of law. Now, we offer tools that can help you read faster, comprehend more. We suggest tools like mind maps to help you take your notes in a non-linear fashion. Those aren't gimmicks. Those are ways that we've proven over the years students can improve their scores consistently, and we encourage you to check those out. But we also know that dealing with your test anxiety or stress is also important, and those are areas where you may want to invite third-party resources in to help. But don't look for a third-party resource that tells you they've got all the questions, or they've got an algorithm that doesn't exist, or that they know exactly what's going to be on the exam. There just isn't any such thing. I think if you exercise your skills and your common sense, if you study over a prolonged period of time, you use the latest goals and techniques of learning that we know that are solid teaching techniques, that's how you're going to be successful on the exam. And don't look for quick fixes. Don't look for things that will solve problems when in fact they're just not going to help you do it at all. You know, there's really no magic to this. It's solid work put together with good, solid teaching. And if you do that, I think you're going to be just fine, and I think you're going to pass the bar. Well, that's our message for this week. I hope you found it useful. There's some interesting myths, aren't there? And things that I've been talking about for many, many years. They just don't seem to go away, but there's no reason that you have to buy into that stuff. I also want to let you know, if you really want to know what you should be doing, we have a free ebook for you. It's called How to Study for the Bar Exam. You'll see the link in the show notes, whether you're on video or audio, so make sure you check that out. And again, a quick reminder, we've got our new webinar coming up on Thursday, August 23rd, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, live webinar called Do Something Different. Make the next bar exam your last bar exam. Hope you'll join us for that. Make sure you register. Should be a lot of fun. Lots of new information, lots of new case studies, lots of great information that you can take in order to do something different and pass the next bar. So look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for being with us this week on the podcast. We'll be back again next Wednesday as we get closer and closer to bar results, and look forward to seeing you all on the pass list and along the extra mile. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.